Hello, and welcome to this video overview in which I, Lukas, discuss some of the most important concepts from Chapter 1, Introduction to College Reading and Writing, in the textbook I wrote, College Composition and Reading, Information and Strategies. In this video, we'll be reviewing some of the main concepts from the chapters, along with some additional examples and discussion. The first topic that I'd like to focus on is the difference between the two methods of communication, narration versus exposition. A narrative is just a story. Narration is storytelling or reporting what happened. This is a method of communication that we're all familiar with. Whether you're telling your friend about your bad day, saying what happened on your recent trip, or reading a book, we're all surrounded by narration in our everyday lives, and we use this method often. Narration has several identifying features. First, narratives are told in chronological order. You begin at the beginning and you go to the end. You say what happened first, then what happened second, then what happened third, and so on. Another identifying characteristic of narratives is that they're simply reporting events. They're not using those events to prove any particular point, but are merely stating what happened. A final identifying characteristic of narratives is that they typically connect the various parts merely with and then type transitions. You can string the events together by simply saying or writing and then, and then, and then between each one. This is due to the fact that they're organized based on chronology or time, not on any other principle. You can see these features in the Goldilocks Example 1 reading that you completed for Chapter 1. The story follows Goldilocks saying what happened in what order. First, she found the cabin, then she messed with each bowl of porridge, and then she messed with all the beds. However, now that you're in college, another type of communication is necessary. Narration is not appropriate for most college-level writing. While students tend to be most familiar with this method and to fall back on it by default, exposition is actually the most useful style of communication for college-level writing because it focuses more on interpretation or argumentation rather than simply reporting. Like narrative writing, expository writing also has some identifying features or characteristics. One of the most important aspects of exposition is that instead of being organized by time, it's organized by ideas. You could see this demonstrated in the Goldilocks example. One paragraph is about Goldilocks' disobedience to her mother's instructions, one is about her vanity, and one is about selfishness, each including events only as relevant to the point being made. Another important feature of exposition is the inclusion of analysis. Not only does it include direct descriptions of what happened, but it also analyzes these events, pointing out the insight the reader was supposed to gain and how it related to the thesis. This step of including analysis will be discussed later in more detail in Chapter 3, Paragraph Development. Another identifying characteristic of expository writing is that it has some common structural elements, each of which will be discussed further on following slides. First, it has an introduction, which you saw in the Goldilocks exposition example, which commonly gives an overview of the ideas or reasons to be discussed. The introduction also usually includes the thesis statement or main idea to be proven that the essay is structured around. In the Goldilocks exposition example, that's the very first sentence. Goldilocks' own vanity and selfishness cause her demise. The bears are not to blame. The thesis includes both the subject and the argument being made about it. Second, expository writing has body paragraphs, which generally start with topic sentences establishing the idea or argument to be discussed, which you can see in the Goldilocks exposition example by looking at the first sentence in the paragraphs after the introduction. For example, the first sentence is, "First, Goldilocks could have avoided the entire situation by following her mother's instructions to be careful and not wander off," which clearly supports the thesis that the end result is her fault and not the bears. Finally, expository texts end with a conclusion that sums up the essay. We'll be discussing expository essay structure further in the next few slides, including examples of each of the paragraph types. A final identifying characteristic of expository text is the presence of transitions. Because ideas rather than time are the basis of organization, it's important to link sections together using transitions indicating the appropriate logical connection, such as therefore or however, in order to lead readers along smoothly. Transitions will be discussed further later in the semester when we go over revision. As that last point implied then, connections are key in expository text, particularly since the organization is more abstract. Everything in the paragraph should be tied to the main point and the thesis, particularly at the beginnings and ends of paragraphs. And both the analysis and the transitional phrases within the paragraphs can indicate relationships between important information and ideas. To sum up then, the main difference between the narratives that most students are familiar with and the expository writing that they're expected to complete in college lies in the areas of organization and structure as well as in purpose. Narration reports events, while exposition uses those events to prove a particular point. You can see that much of the same information is contained in both Goldilocks examples, for instance, but the expository example only mentions events as they're relevant to a particular idea, rather than merely reporting everything that happened. Basically, narration lists information, while exposition uses that information to support a particular interpretation or argument. Now that you're in college, it's no longer enough to just present information. Now you must analyze it, which we will discuss further in the lesson on paragraphs, and then again when we go over argumentation. Another important concept from the chapter is the overview of essay structure. While you should all be familiar with the basic parts of an essay already, often it can be beneficial to review. In addition, this overview will include several examples to illustrate the concepts being discussed. The first part of an academic essay is the introduction, which draws the reader in and gives them an idea of what the essay will be all about. So then, these two aspects, drawing the reader in and connecting to the rest of the essay, are the main purposes of an introduction. If introductions give you trouble, I advise you to review the suggestions for introductions on pages 10 to 11, such as beginning with your thesis or a striking example. However, I think that one of the most useful tips for producing well-written introductions is to wait and write them last. Many people start by writing the introduction simply due to the fact that it's the first part of the essay, but if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense to wait. After all, it's a lot easier to connect to your body paragraphs if you've already written them, and thus know what they're going to say, particularly since you often don't fully realize what you want to say or how you want to say it until you have completed your first draft. As most of you know, the thesis statement should also be included in your introduction. In order to give the thesis emphasis, it should be placed either first or last in the introduction. If it's first, you should connect back to it at the end of the introduction. Thesis statements will be discussed further in Chapter 3, Paragraph Development, but for now, I'll add that a thesis statement consists of two parts, the topic or subject, and the argument that you're making about it. If you have trouble with thesis statements, one helpful strategy can be to include the word should in your thesis statements, since this clearly indicates that there is an argument. You're stating how people should act or should think about some topic or subject. As the textbook chapter notes, there are some things to stay away from when writing an introduction, such as making an announcement or talking about yourself in the wrong way. Let's take a look at a poor introductory paragraph and talk about what problems it has, after which we'll review a strong introduction based on the same essay. I will begin by reading the example introduction. This essay will be about school uniforms. I have done a lot of research, and I will present my resources showing why schools should make the kids wear uniforms. Professor James Smith makes a good argument about how kids can still express themselves, and Sam Jones has a lot of good information, like studies about the benefits. Procon.org had lots of good information, which my essay will go over. Doesn't it make sense that uniforms would help kids focus on school? I think so. Attendance and graduation rates go up when students wear uniforms. Now, take a moment to pause the video and think about what you see wrong with this introduction. What are its problems? When you're ready, resume playing the video, and I'll discuss some of the more outstanding flaws. One primary issue with this introduction is its lack of clarity. While it was clear what the argument was, that school uniforms should be required, the actual introduction was very unclear about how that was going to be supported. Some authors were named, but there's little indication of what points will be made to support the thesis. This might be okay if instead there was some compelling information or an example, but a list of names of authors and websites does nothing to prepare the audience for your argument or get them inclined to agree with you. Another problem is the fact that the thesis is buried within the introduction rather than having the additional emphasis it would receive from being placed at either the beginning or the end. In addition, if the thesis is not at the end, then the last sentence should remind readers of the thesis, and thus the point of the paper. In this case, ending the piece with a specific information can make the reader think that the paper is primarily about attendance and graduation rates, rather than that being just one argument among several, all supporting the overall point about uniforms. One final issue with this example is with the tone. An essay written for an academic environment should not talk about yourself unless it's relevant, like if you're using your own experiences as an example. Telling the story of your research is not an acceptable substitute for presenting that research, however. In addition, questions should be avoided as being too informal, and any time you weaken something by placing "I think" in front of it, you should eliminate it. Instead of "I think we should require school uniforms," say "We should require school uniforms." In the case of this essay, instead of "I think so," the author should have revised the whole statement, perhaps saying "It is clear that," instead of making the paper sound like personal opinion by using "I think." Now that we've seen a problematic introduction, let's take a look at one that you might actually want to model your own introductions after. Obviously, this is a stronger example of an introductory paragraph for an essay with the same thesis and sources. It says, "While school uniforms have long been debated, a closer look at the evidence makes clear that K-12 students in the U.S. should be required to wear school uniforms. The benefits range from encouraging punctuality, since students don't need to take time choosing outfits each day, and saving money on school clothes, to reducing crime, gang activity, and even bullying by giving students a level playing field. When all students are wearing the same outfit, they're less concerned about how they look and how they fit in with their peers. Thus, they can concentrate on their schoolwork. And this increased focus on education, rather than on social matters, can only benefit the students. When the evidence is examined, it is clear that school uniforms should be required of K-12 students in the U.S. One of the things that this introduction does correctly is that it begins with the thesis statement and then comes back to it at the end, making sure that readers are left with a strong sense of the point of all the arguments being made. They know what everything is supposed to connect to, and thus are in a better position to make sense of, and be persuaded by, your argument. Another aspect that accounts for the strength of this example is that it includes the general arguments that the paper will cover. This isn't required, since there are different ways of capturing the reader's attention and readying them for the essay body, but it's one of the easiest, effective ways to begin an essay, and it's a great structure to fall back on if you haven't gotten any brilliant inspiration for the introductory paragraph. Now that you've seen both a strong and a weak introduction, let's move on to the next portion of the structure. The second part of a college essay is the body paragraphs, the place where you support and develop your reasons and ideas. You should have one body paragraph per idea or reason, and they'll usually start with a topic sentence that indicates what that topic is. Topic sentences also often indicate how the topic is related to or supports the main idea of the essay, the thesis. After the topic sentence, specific support, reasons, evidence, and other information and analysis is included to support that topic sentence. Paragraphing has two purposes. First is to indicate to the reader that a new topic will be broached, so it makes reading easier by warning readers of an upcoming change. The second purpose is to make reading physically easier on readers. If you've ever gone to a website and been confronted with a solid wall of text with no white space anywhere, you know how intimidating and exhausting it can be to confront text that isn't divided into paragraphs. Thus, you should make sure that you never have a paragraph that is an entire page long. If you write one, review it to figure out where you can break it up logically. I guarantee that if you've written an entire page, there's at least a slight shift somewhere in it that you can use as the dividing line. With this general idea of what a body paragraph can do, let's take a look at how a specific paragraph might be constructed, sticking with our topic of school uniforms. As with the introduction, I'll read the paragraph aloud and then follow with some discussion and evaluation. One of the most compelling reasons to require school uniforms is the safety of the students themselves. In Long Beach, California, after 2 years of a district-wide K-8 mandatory uniform policy, reports of assault and battery in the district's schools decreased by 34%. Assault with a deadly weapon dropped by 50%. Fighting incidents went down by 51%. Sex offenses were cut by 74%. Robbery dropped by 65%. Possession of weapons or weapon lookalikes decreased by 52%. Possession of drugs went down by 69%. And vandalism was lowered by 18%. School uniforms also prevent students from concealing weapons under baggy clothing, making it easier to keep track of students on field trips, and they make intruders on campus more visible. These proven benefits and logical advances make it clear that school safety, which has been so much in the news lately, demands that our young students wear school uniforms. One thing to note is the strong and clear topic sentence. Not only does it make clear the argument that the paragraph will be making, that school uniforms promote safety, but it also connects that directly and explicitly back to the thesis. Even without having seen the introduction, we would know that the thesis or point is that we should have school uniforms. Another strength is the clear, relevant, compelling, and correctly cited support for the point. All of it directly supports the topic sentence, which in turn directly supports the thesis. Finally, the paragraph ends with a discussion that ties the given information back to the thesis, and ends the paragraph with a link to the point that will serve both to keep the reader focused and to transition smoothly to the next paragraph, assuming its topic sentence connects to the thesis as well. The final portion of the essay is the conclusion, which wraps up the essay and reminds the reader of the point being proven and why they should be convinced. Just like the end of a movie or book or speech is often the part that you remember the best, the conclusion will affect how your readers evaluate and remember your writing. If your conclusion is essentially a summary of the essay, readers will have a comprehensive reminder of what they should take away from it. You want to make sure that you're tying back clearly to the thesis and connecting to the reasons given in the body of the essay, although you don't need to mention all of them. In addition, it helps if the last sentence leaves a strong impression on the reader. Further suggestions for conclusion paragraph material can be found in your textbook on page 14, but for now, let's take a look at an example of a well-done conclusion. Here is an example of a strong conclusion for our essay on school uniforms. As you can see, the question of school uniforms encompasses a lot more than just fashion choices or freedom of expression. The schools that have instituted uniforms have seen improvements in everything from attendance, discipline, and school or community spirit to more vital measures such as graduation rates, bullying, and student safety. In addition, parents will be relieved to save money on school clothes, while kids will still be able to assert their individuality. As junior high school student Amelia Jimenez wrote for the Pennsylvania Patriot News website, contrary to popular belief, uniforms do not stop students from being themselves. Uniforms do not silence voices. Students can wear a variety of expressive items, such as buttons or jewelry. When students, parents, administrators, and researchers can all agree, then it's time we took action. The United States needs to do what is best for our children: require school uniforms. The first thing to note here is that it begins with a conclusion phrase alerting readers to the fact that this is summing things up. It follows with an overall view of the arguments that were made, and includes a bit of additional concrete support, which leads smoothly into a strong final 2 sentences that reinforce and drive home the thesis statement. Again, just like with the introduction, there's many ways that you can structure a strong and successful conclusion, but this summary method is a good basic structure to fall back on. This wraps up our in-depth look at essay structure. Next, we'll be examining ways of expanding those essays. One of the most common approaches to teaching essay writing is the 5-paragraph essay approach, where you have an introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. This is an excellent foundation for the essay format. However, in college, it's often not sufficient. For example, if you're assigned a 5-page essay, each of your paragraphs would have to be an entire page or more. Therefore, now that you've entered college, you're ready to move beyond the basic format represented by 5-paragraph essays. In short, you need to add more paragraphs. There are 2 methods for accomplishing this. The first method is the simplest and simply involves adding additional reasons. For example, as I state in the textbook, if I'm writing an essay arguing that everyone should take classes at their local community college, in the 5-paragraph essay format, I would have 3 reasons. For example, I could discuss how it makes you try new things, how you meet new people, and how you'll improve your life's prospects. If I were to merely add more reasons, I might discuss as well how you're expanding your mind and how you'll be providing a good example. This brings it from a 5-paragraph essay to a 7-paragraph one. However, a better method is to go more deeply into your reasons, dividing a paragraph into subtopics. One way might be to give several examples to support the reason, with each example being in its own paragraph. Another is to think more thoroughly about your reason itself. For example, in my essay about attending college, I mentioned that one reason was meeting new people. I could actually subdivide this into several paragraphs. One proving that you will meet new people, one talking about how you'll make more friends, one talking about how learning to deal with people you don't like will be helpful, and one talking about how your increased experience with people will help you be a better judge of people. That's just created 4 paragraphs out of what was formerly just 1. Another example would be to talk in different paragraphs about different ways that you would improve your life prospects, taking health or cooking classes, getting training for a better job, etc. Again, this would enable you to create several paragraphs out of what was formerly a single paragraph, and the additional analysis and information also makes your argument more compelling. For this reason, I highly recommend this method of going beyond the 5-paragraph essay. On the next slide, we'll take a look at how this subtopic expansion might work using our previous topic of school uniforms. If I were writing an essay with the thesis, K through 12 students in the United States should be required to wear school uniforms, I could certainly write a 5-paragraph essay to do so. I could have one paragraph be that uniforms make kids safer, another about how they benefit parents by saving them money, and then a final one about how they help students stay focused. However, if I really wanted, I could take each of these topics, safety, benefits to parents, and focus, and break each one down into subtopics. Let's take a look at how that might work. Even with the exact same thesis and topics, we'll get a much more substantial essay this way. First, instead of just having one paragraph about safety, I could break it down into several paragraphs, each of which argues a different way in which school uniforms contribute to safety. One paragraph about how intruders are easier to spot since they're unlikely to be wearing the school uniforms. One about how weapons are harder to hide in the types of clothing used for school uniforms than in the baggy pants and oversized garments often worn in other schools. One paragraph about how gang affiliations are harder to display since so often clothing is used to signal gang status. And one paragraph about it being easier to track students. For instance, spotting a uniformed student who's not where they should be, such as off school grounds during school hours. Instead of just one paragraph about benefits for parents, I could have 3. One about saving money, not having to get expensive designer clothing. One about saving time on back-to-school shopping. And one about it making it easier to get ready in the morning. We can do the same thing to the final topic as well, with a discussion of demonstrated benefits, such as increased attendance and graduation rates, less bullying, and more. As you can see, this kind of subdivision can be a powerful tool, both for strengthening and lengthening your essays, and I encourage you to try it out. The final section of the chapter discussed some tips and information for doing well at college reading, and I'll just mention a few here. One of the most important parts of doing well in college reading is to take responsibility. You're expected to be an adult, and the teacher will not hold your hand. Even if there isn't an assignment associated with the assigned reading, you should do it to gain the most from the course. And just because there wasn't an assignment announced that specifically was based off the reading, doesn't mean you won't need to do it in order to do well in the course or on tests or later assignments. Another important way to be efficient and effective in your reading is to use strategies such as highlighting, doing summaries, answering questions, or doing other things that force you to engage with the reading. We'll be discussing reading strategies in detail in a later lesson. Another approach is to vary your reading style and speed to the content of what you're reading and your purpose for reading it. You should skim things if you're reviewing them, read at normal speed when reading material that's not challenging or is on a topic that you're familiar with, and slow down to read more carefully when dealing with difficult material or something that you need to not just understand, but memorize. Using reading and writing to support each other is a great way to learn. Taking notes while reading or doing summaries after reading are effective ways to use writing to support reading, while doing research on a topic or subject is a way that you can use reading to support your writing. Also, paying attention to how professionals organize their writing and make it effective will give you tools and strategies that you can use in your own writing. Again, we'll be talking more about these ideas later in the course. One of the best ways to get more from reading is to read actively and critically. Get involved. If you think about what you're reading and engage with it, forming your own opinion, you're more likely both to understand it and to remember it. Finally, you should also be aware that any reading is a combination of more and less important points, and varying your attention accordingly will help you focus on the important aspects so that they are retained. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that this overview was helpful and illuminating. Please don't hesitate to contact me with any questions you may have about the material. I'm always happy to help.